Imagine planning your dream trip only to find out some countries are completely off limits to Americans. Why are these places so dangerous or restricted? Today we're counting down the top 10 countries Americans are warned or banned from visiting in 2025. From political tensions to personal safety risks, each destination has a story that reveals the world's most volatile fault lines. We'll break down the real reasons behind these travel bans and what they say about global conflict today. So, let's dive into the world's most perilous places for US travelers. Here's what you need to know before you even think about booking that flight. First up is Russia, a nation that has once again become a focal point of global tension and uncertainty. Today, Russia is more dangerous for Americans than at any point since the Cold War, with the atmosphere growing more hostile by the day. The US State Department's Do Not Travel advisory is unambiguous. Americans face a real risk of wrongful detention, political targeting, and being caught up in international disputes. Recent high-profile cases, like journalist Evan Gershkovich and ex-Marine Paul Whelan, demonstrate that Americans can be arrested on questionable charges, then used as bargaining chips in tense diplomatic standoffs. The threat is not hypothetical, it's happening now. In Russia, surveillance is everywhere. Assume that your movements, conversations, and even your online activity are being closely monitored at all times. The ongoing war in Ukraine has only intensified anti-American sentiment, making harassment, discrimination, or even violence against foreigners a very real possibility. Even seemingly innocent acts like snapping a photo near a government building or monument can be misinterpreted as espionage or subversive activity, leading to serious trouble. If you find yourself in trouble, the US Embassy's ability to help is extremely limited. With diplomatic ties strained and commercial flights out of Russia increasingly scarce, your options for leaving safely are dwindling. If you're currently in Russia, the message from the US government is simple and urgent. Leave now, while you still can. If you're not already there, don't go. The risks far outweigh any potential rewards. The new Iron Curtain is not just a metaphor, it's a reality. For Americans, Russia is firmly on the other side, closed off and increasingly hostile. The risk to your freedom, your safety, and your future is simply too high to ignore. No tourist attraction, no cultural experience is worth gambling with your liberty or your life. In 2025, Russia is a no-go zone for Americans. The warnings are clear and the consequences are severe. The stakes have never been higher, and the risks have never been more real. Think twice, no, think 3 times before even considering Russia as a destination. Your safety depends on it. Next, Venezuela, a country of natural wonders but also economic collapse and political chaos. Violent crime, civil unrest, and a government hostile to the US make it extremely dangerous for Americans. Hyperinflation and shortages have fueled kidnappings, robberies, and carjackings, especially in Caracas. Americans are seen as lucrative targets for criminals and corrupt officials. Political protests can turn violent without warning, and security forces may detain foreigners on suspicion of espionage. The US Embassy is closed, so there's no help if you're in trouble. Express kidnappings and ransom abductions are common. The rule of law is weak, and you're on your own if things go wrong. Venezuela's beauty is overshadowed by daily dangers. For Americans, it's simply not worth the risk. Venezuela remains firmly off limits. Iraq remains one of the world's most dangerous places for Americans, a country where the echoes of war and instability still shape daily life. Despite years of international intervention and attempts at rebuilding, the threat level remains extremely high. Terrorism, kidnapping, and armed conflict are constant threats that can erupt at any moment, often with devastating consequences for both locals and foreigners. ISIS and other extremist groups continue to operate in the shadows, launching attacks and targeting public spaces, government buildings, and especially foreigners who are seen as valuable targets. Americans in particular are considered high-value targets for abduction or attack, making any travel or work in the region extremely risky. Sectarian militias and criminal gangs operate openly, blurring the lines between politics, crime, and insurgency, and making the security situation even more unpredictable. Rocket and drone attacks on US facilities are frequent, and civilians, both Iraqi and foreign, can easily be caught in the crossfire, with little warning or chance to escape. Even in the relatively stable north, where Kurdish forces maintain a strong presence, risks remain, and the threat of sudden violence or terrorist activity is never far away. The US government has extremely limited ability to provide emergency help anywhere in Iraq, leaving Americans largely on their own if trouble arises. Infrastructure is fragile, with roads, bridges, and utilities often damaged or destroyed, and violence can erupt without warning, disrupting daily life and travel. The ancient wonders of Mesopotamia, once a beacon for travelers and historians, are now hidden behind a wall of danger and uncertainty, inaccessible to most. For now, Iraq is a no-go zone for Americans, with strict travel warnings and closed borders making entry nearly impossible. The risks of traveling here far outweigh any potential reward, whether for business, tourism, or adventure. In this landscape of lingering conflict, travel is not just dangerous, it is a life-threatening proposition, and caution cannot be overstated. Iran's rich history is overshadowed by its modern hostility toward Americans. The US has no diplomatic presence, and Americans risk arbitrary arrest, detention, and being used as political pawns. Dual nationals are especially vulnerable, often accused of espionage and held for years. Surveillance is constant, and innocent actions can be misinterpreted as spying. The legal process is opaque, and fair treatment is unlikely. Anti-American sentiment is promoted by the state, making the environment unpredictable and dangerous. Even in international waters, Americans risk harassment or detention by Iranian forces. The US can't help if you're detained. The risk of becoming a bargaining chip is simply too high. Iran is strictly off limits for Americans. Afghanistan under Taliban rule has become one of the world's most inaccessible and dangerous places for Americans and other foreigners. The streets are heavily patrolled by armed fighters, and the atmosphere is tense, with uncertainty lurking around every corner. There's no US embassy, no consular support, and no safe passage for those who find themselves in trouble. The absence of any official American presence means that if you need help, you're completely on your own. The Taliban and ISIS-K both pose extreme threats, with bombings, shootings, and kidnappings now tragically common. Rival militant groups compete for power, making the security situation even more volatile and unpredictable. Americans risk wrongful detention or abduction for ransom or political leverage. Even innocent travelers can become pawns in a dangerous game, targeted simply for their nationality. The legal system is unpredictable. If you're detained, you have no rights, no access to lawyers, and no outside contact. Trials are swift and sentences can be severe, with little hope for appeal or intervention. A humanitarian crisis is rampant. Poverty, starvation, and collapsed healthcare have left millions struggling to survive. Aid is scarce, and many families rely on international organizations just to get by. Infrastructure is failing, and basic services are nearly non-existent. Roads are crumbling, electricity is unreliable, and clean water is hard to find, making daily life a constant struggle. Taliban law is strictly enforced, and even minor, unintentional violations can result in harsh punishment. Foreigners are especially vulnerable, often singled out for questioning or worse. The US government cannot intervene or offer any assistance. If you get into trouble, there is no one to call and no way out. Every aspect of travel here is perilous. Roads are unsafe, airports are barely functioning, and checkpoints are everywhere, each one a potential threat. Afghanistan is a war zone with no safety net. Violence can erupt at any moment, and civilians are often caught in the crossfire. For Americans, it's a reckless gamble with your life. The risks are overwhelming and the consequences can be dire. Stay away. Afghanistan is off limits. North Korea is the only country where it's illegal for Americans to visit without special permission. The travel ban is due to the extreme risk of arrest and long-term detention. The tragic case of Otto Warmbier is a stark warning. Minor infractions can lead to horrific consequences. The legal system is a tool of the regime, with no due process or outside contact. Americans are often used as political pawns. Even with special permission, visitors are under constant surveillance and strict control. Any misstep can result in immediate arrest. The US has no diplomatic presence. Help is nearly impossible. North Korea is a black hole for American travelers. The risk is absolute, don't even consider it. Yemen's civil war has created one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. Terrorism, armed conflict, and kidnapping are rampant. No part of the country is safe. Violence is widespread and unpredictable. Terrorist groups and criminal gangs target Westerners for ransom or propaganda. The US embassy is closed and help is unavailable. Infrastructure is destroyed and disease is widespread. Landmines and unexploded ordnance make travel deadly. Yemen is a failed state in total chaos. For Americans, it's a place of extreme danger. Do not travel to Yemen. Libya has been in chaos since the fall of Gaddafi, with rival militias and no central authority. Armed conflict, terrorism, and rampant crime make it extremely dangerous. Americans are prime targets for kidnapping and violence. Terrorist groups exploit the instability, and criminal gangs operate freely. The US embassy is closed, so there's no help if you're in trouble. Travel is difficult and dangerous, with shifting front lines and contested borders. Law and order are absent, and foreigners are seen as lucrative targets. The risks are overwhelming. Libya is a definitive no-go zone for Americans. Avoid it at all costs. Syria's decade-long civil war has made it one of the world's most dangerous places. Multiple factions, including the Assad regime, opposition groups, and extremists, control different regions. Airstrikes, shelling, and ground combat are daily realities. Americans are high-priority targets for kidnapping or detention by all sides. Terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda-linked factions still operate. The US has no diplomatic presence and cannot help if you're captured. Infrastructure is destroyed and basic services are gone. Chemical weapons have been used and human suffering is immense. Any travel here is a direct risk to your life. Syria is a war zone where Americans are targets. The dangers are extreme and inescapable. Do not travel to Syria. Somalia is the textbook example of a failed state. Decades of war, no central government, and rampant violence. Al-Shabaab controls large areas and targets Westerners with bombings and kidnappings. Americans are prime targets for abduction by terrorists or criminal gangs. The US government can do little to help. Piracy remains a threat off the coast and mariners are at risk. Lawlessness means no reliable police, courts, or emergency services. Healthcare is almost non-existent and disease is widespread. Travel is extremely dangerous with illegal checkpoints and extortion. Somalia is simply too dangerous for Americans. These 10 countries are more than just red zones on a map. They're windows into global conflict and instability. For Americans, the risks far outweigh the rewards, no matter how tempting the destination. Appreciate these places from afar and remember, there are countless safe, welcoming countries to explore. Want more travel insights? Subscribe, like, and comment below. Where are you planning to go next? Let us know. Safe travels, explore wisely.